Are you playing running back roulette to try and decide who to start and who to sit here in week number 1? You can stop all that now. I'm about to drop my week 1 starts and sits for the running back position to kick off fantasy football's opening week. And let's kick it off with Chuba Hubbard. Ain't no player out there getting more disrespect than Chuba Hubbard is, and this week he is taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Only 9 players have produced more 20-plus fantasy performances last season than Hubbard's 6, and all 9 of those players were likely selected in the top 24 selections of recent fantasy football drafts. Meanwhile, Hubbard, he likely saw 15 other running backs get selected ahead of him. Talk about getting no respect. This is the Rodney Dangerfield of running backs when it comes to fantasy football. Hubbard finished as the RB12 last season, averaged 16.1 fantasy points, and we're still questioning whether or not we should be starting him. Stop that. Hubbard is a no-doubter, a must-start week 1 option, and he could find himself in the running as the overall RB1 taking on that Jaguars team. In 2024, the Jaguars allowed 1,848 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns on the ground to the running back position, leading the way with 23.44 fantasy points per game. That is the 6th most. If Jacksonville's defense hasn't improved the way they hoped it has, they could be in for a long day, as Hubbard's 337 explosive yards, that was 7th in the league, while his 676 yards after contact, that was the 6th most amongst running backs. Another start this week, how about Alvin Kamara, as the Saints are taking on the Arizona Cardinals. Alvin Kamara may be the only offensive option that the Saints have this week. Let's call it the way it is. I'm not sure Spencer Rattler is going to have the time he needs to locate wide receivers down the field, instead opting for more of a dink and dunk approach to move the ball. In limited action with Rattler under center, Kamara, he caught 17 passes. Last season, the Arizona Cardinals defense was 21st in receptions allowed to running backs with 79, 25th in receiving yards allowed with 649, and finished 28th, allowing 23.72 fantasy points per game to the position. Last season, only Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Saquon Barkley averaged more fantasy points per game than Kamara's 19. Before the start of Week 15, Kamara was second only to Barkley on a points per game basis, and in his 8-year career, his worst PPR finish was an RB13 performance back in 2022, all of which he has posted at least 1,100 yards from scrimmage. Hey, that's telling me you're starting him no matter what. Another running back you're starting no matter what is Ashton Jeanty of the Las Vegas Raiders, as they're taking on the New England Patriots. Last season, the New England Patriots surrendered 1,972 yards on the ground to opposing backs. That was the 3rd most. In Ashton Jeanty's final season at Boise State, the Raiders featured back ran for 2,601 yards, averaging 7 yards per carry and scoring on 29 occasions. Now, I'm not saying that Jeanty, he's going to go off for 200 plus yards in his regular season debut, but I'm saying this is a favorable matchup, considering the Patriots also allowed 22.82 fantasy points per game last year. Jeanty looks like he's a strong volume play this week, and every week for that matter, considering the depth chart behind the rookie reads as Raheem Mostert, Zamir White, and Dylan Lobby. While effective when needed, Mostert isn't the same back he once was, and White, he fell out of the graces of managers last season with that Armageddon-esque 2024 campaign. As Graham Barfield pointed out, Jeanty, along with Barkley and Joe Mixon, are the only backs to average 6.0 yards created and 0.45 missed tackles forced per carry in their final collegiate season, dating back to 2016. That's it for the starts. How about those players that we're looking to sit? And I'm going to start things off with maybe a little bit of a hot take here, a little clickbaity, and I'm going to say temper those expectations when it comes to Bijan Robinson against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, hey, this isn't without warrant, and the general rule is you start your studs no matter what. However, sometimes we need to temper our expectations and exercise some caution out there. Robinson is a risky proposition this week, and if you start him, make sure to have yourself a safe option in your lineup to help alleviate some of that risk. Why is Robinson risky? Well, for starters, Vita Vea is a bad man in the middle of that Buccaneers defense. Second, Tampa Bay held opposing backs to the 7th fewest fantasy points last season, limiting them to 1,239 yards on the ground and 7 touchdowns. Now, in both contests against the Bucs last season, Robinson was held to less than 65 yards on the ground in each game. He did, however, have a solid receiving game in the earlier of the 2 meetings, where he had 7 receptions for 43 yards. In the second contest, Tampa was better prepared, limiting Robinson to 16 yards on just 3 receptions. For Robinson to produce in fantasy, he's going to need to be involved in the pass game, which is definitely a possibility here, While the Buccaneers are stingy against the run, they are susceptible to the pass game, in which they allowed the 5th most receiving yards to the position, 661 a season ago. Another running back that we are sitting this week is Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans as they take on the Denver Broncos. Pollard is poised for a great season here for fantasy here in 2025, but he ends up on this week's sit list due to this poor matchup. Last season, the Broncos allowed 1,956 yards to opposing backs and just 13 touchdowns. When you break that down into fantasy terms, that equates to 16.1 fantasy points per game, the 3rd fewest. Heading into 2025, the Broncos have somehow improved on all 3 levels on the defensive side of the ball. However, no addition is bigger than the return of Alex Singleton to the middle of their defense after missing much of the 2024 season due to injury. Back in 2023, Singleton recorded 177 combined tackles. That was the 3rd most that season. Not only is the Denver defense legit, but their offense could put up points with the best of them. In the preseason, the Broncos offense averaged 28.3 points per game. Now, hey, that's preseason, you say, but you know what? In the final 7 games of the Broncos' regular season of the 2024 season, Denver's offense averaged 32.5 points per game. This game script, it could write off Pollard early on. In the final sit of the week, how about rookie Omarion Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers as they take on the Kansas City Chiefs? It will be interesting to see how Harbaugh and Greg Roman deploy Hampton and Najee Harris this week. On one hand, Hampton, he's that sexy new toy that we believe will be in a run-first offense. Hampton, productive in college, 1,500 yards each of his last 2 seasons there, while carrying the load for the Tar Heels, producing 5.9 yards per carry on 534 rushing attempts. As for Harris, he is making a return to the lineup after a bit of a fireworks mishap there early on in the offseason, and will likely play a factor in capping Hampton's fantasy ceiling, at least early on in the season. Let's not forget that Harbaugh and company had a plan for Harris when they signed him early on in the offseason. He was a priority signing for this team. In 4 seasons, Harris has yet to miss a game and has produced at least 1,000 yards in each of those seasons. Last season, no team was stingier than the Kansas City Chiefs were against the running back position, limiting opposing backs to just 13.6 fantasy points per game. The next closest team to the Chiefs was the Eagles, who surrendered 2.16 more fantasy points per game than the Chiefs did, while only the Lions and the Ravens allowed fewer than the 1,269 rushing yards that the Chiefs allowed. That's it for this week's Fantasy Football Starts and Sits, but if you want more fantasy football content, head over to RotoBaller.com for all the latest fantasy football news and analysis. We'll see you next time.